Wow, this one you brought us, the Red Book, Liber Novus, by Carl Jung.
Yeah.
It's intense. Not exactly light reading, is it?
Not at all. It's like you're right there inside Jung's mind, seeing everything raw, unfiltered. It's Liber Novus, by the way, meaning the new book. And new it is, in a way. A record of what he called his, well, confrontation with the unconscious.
Yeah, and visually too, right? I mean, it's not just a book, it's art. It's like part beautiful manuscript, part journal, all these intricate words, and honestly, some pretty wild images.
Right. It's so striking visually.
So for this deep dive, I guess our mission is to unpack some of those big ideas that, well, kind of took root in this book. It's like we get to see the very beginnings of Jung's whole psychology.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is you can see all these influences swirling around in it. Like there's mythology, old philosophy, religious stuff. Plus, of course, all of Jung's own, well, intense personal experiences. All those threads, they're woven together in this book. You can see where his later ideas came from.
Like the seeds of it all. And hopefully by exploring this book, we can give our listeners like some aha moments. Understand what Jung built his whole understanding of the human mind upon.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive in, shall we? Where do we even begin with a book like this?
Well, one of the things that really shaped Jung, even before the Red Book, was his reading. He was a voracious reader, especially when he was younger. He was really into Goethe, for example, particularly Faust.
Oh, interesting. Faust, huh?
Yeah. And what really stuck with him, he says, was how seriously Goethe took the whole idea of evil. Like with Mephistopheles, the devil. It wasn't just a superficial, oh, evil's bad kind of thing. It was a deep engagement with the whole concept.
I see, yeah, taking it seriously, not shying away from it.
Yeah.
Makes sense, I guess, if you're going to explore the dark side of the mind.
Right. And then, of course, there's Schopenhauer. Jung was really influenced by him, too. And Schopenhauer was another one who didn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
Yeah.
Suffering, evil, the whole deal.
Yeah, so those were like the frameworks
Right.
for thinking about the darker parts of being human, not just ignoring them or pretending they're not there.
Exactly. And it's not just the ideas either. Jung himself had this strong feeling of being connected to the past. He even said he felt like he was living in 2 centuries.
Oh, wow. He actually said that.
He did. He longed for the 18th century, the intellectual scene back then. He felt out of step with his own time, which is interesting, isn't it?
Very. It's like he was, I don't know, ahead of his time. Or maybe just different.
Maybe both. And the sense of duality, it really came out in a personal way for him. He started to experience 2 distinct personalities within himself. He called them NO1 and NO2.
NO1 and NO2.
Not
Simple, but I guess it gets the point across.
Right. And this experience, this feeling of not being just one unified self, it seems like it really laid the groundwork for his later ideas about the conscious and the unconscious parts of the mind. Early on, he's already seeing how complex the inner world is.
And then there's a big turning point in his life, right? Around 1908, he settles down in Küsnacht, right on Lake Zurich. Beautiful spot. Then, just a year later, he resigns from his position at the Burg-Holzli Hospital. Big move.
Huge move. Leaving Burg-Holzli gave him the freedom to focus on his own private practice, which was growing at the time, and more importantly, it gave him time for his own research. And that's where the Red Book really comes in, because this is when he gets deep into mythology, folklore, religion, all that symbolic stuff.
So he builds this massive library, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was really digging deep into these ancient stories and traditions.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a casual interest for him. He said he found it absolutely intoxicating.
Intoxicating, huh? And like he felt a real pull towards those ancient myths.
Oh, completely. He wasn't just looking at it from an academic point of view, like a detached scholar. Later on, he even said he felt like he was living in an insane asylum of his own making during that time, surrounded by all these mythic figures, centaurs, nymphs, gods, goddesses. He was analyzing their stories as if they were his patients.
That's wild. Like bridging that gap between ancient myths and like the individual psyche.
Exactly. He even said he would read a Greek myth or an African myth as if a lunatic was telling him his personal history. Trying to find those psychological patterns, those universal human experiences in all those different cultures.
Yeah, like those stories, those myths, they're speaking to something deeper, something about the human experience, regardless of where or when you live.
Right. And it's important to remember what else was happening at the time. Back then, in the late 1800s, there was this huge boom in scholarship on comparative religion and, the psychology of different cultures.
Oh, yeah, like Max Mueller, right. He was doing all that groundbreaking work translating those sacred texts from the East, bringing them to the West for the first time.
Exactly. Think about Muller's Sacred Books of the East, for example. Works like that, they really shook things up. They challenged the dominant Christian worldview that had been around for so long. It exposed people to a whole different range of spiritual ideas, mythologies, and it made them question their assumptions about, well, everything. Reality, the human spirit, you name it.
Yeah, so it's like this perfect storm, wasn't it? You have Jung, who's already deep into these personal explorations, and then this whole intellectual shift is happening around him.
Exactly. And that's the background against which the Red Book is born.
So how does it actually begin? What triggers him to start this whole project?
Well, in 1913, he picks up this old brown notebook. He'd actually started writing in it back in 1902, but set it aside. Now he starts again. And at first, he's using metaphors to describe his inner states.
Metaphors? Like what?
Well, for example, he talks about feeling like he's in a desert under the scorching hot sun, and he connects that image to the intensity of consciousness.
Wow. So he's already, like, actively engaging with his unconscious.
Yeah.
Trying to put those experiences into words, even if it's through metaphors.
Exactly. And he's clear about the fact that this isn't just an autobiography, like a normal book where you recount the events of your life.
Right, because it's not just about what happened to him on the outside, but, like, his inner journey.
Right. He says he's writing autobiographical material, but not as an autobiography. He's more interested in capturing those inner experiences, the landscape of his mind, so to speak, his own process of self-discovery.
And the way he writes it, it's not like a straight narrative either, is it? It's all these dialogues, these internal conversations.
It's very deliberate. That dialogical style, it goes way back, all the way to Plato, actually, with his dialogues. Jung knew that tradition. He was building on it. He even mentions St. Augustine's soliloquies specifically, which is also written as a dialogue.
Ah, I see. So it's a way for him to explore these different parts of himself, these different voices within his own mind.
Exactly. And then there's a really crucial event that pushes him even further into this whole self-exploration. It's a fantasy he has, a vision of a huge flood.
A flood?
Yeah. He has this incredibly vivid and disturbing fantasy of this flood engulfing all of Europe. And he comes to interpret this not as a personal premonition, like something that's going to happen to him directly, but as a precognition, like a glimpse into the future of Europe, of the collective.
Wow. So he's seeing his own inner experiences as somehow connected to what's happening in the world.
Exactly. It's a big dream, he says, carrying meaning for everyone, not just himself. And after this, he starts to look at all his other fantasies, those inner images and dialogues, to see if they have the same kind of connection to the collective. That's what Liber Novus is really all about.
Trying to understand how his own inner world is related to, like, the bigger picture.
Precisely. And then, of course, World War I breaks out in 1914. And for Jung, that seems to validate these experiences, these strange visions and fantasies he's been having. It's like the external world is mirroring his own internal turmoil.
So the war, in a way, makes him feel less crazy. Like, if the world can go this mad, then maybe his own internal struggles make more sense.
Right. In the Scrutinies, which is the third part of Liber Novus, he actually writes that the war helped him understand a lot of what he'd been experiencing internally. The scale of it, the destruction, the suffering, it all mirrored the intensity of what he was going through in his own mind.
It's like the war gave him the courage to keep going, to make sense of those earlier, more confusing parts of Liber Novus.
Exactly. And he also says that the war, strangely enough, actually dispelled his fear of going mad.
How so?
Well, he realized that if the world itself, on this massive scale, could descend into such apparent irrationality and violence, then his own inner explorations felt less like personal psychosis and more like a necessary confrontation with something universal, something deeply human.
Yeah, so it's not just him, it's the whole world. Everyone's going through this collective madness.
Right. And he makes an important point later on about the difference between active imagination, which is what he's doing in the Red Book, and actual psychosis.
Okay, so how does he tell the difference?
Well, he says that in both cases, you're dealing with the same raw material from the unconscious. All those fantasies, images, and stuff. The difference is whether you can integrate those experiences into your conscious life.
I see. So if you get overwhelmed by those fantasies, if you can't make sense of them and bring them into your awareness, then you're in trouble.
Exactly. That's psychosis. But if you can engage with those experiences, work with them, and integrate them into your personality, then it's active imagination, a creative process.
And it's important to remember that all of this is happening within a specific context. Jung wasn't just off on his own, right? He was part of a community, a whole group of people in Zurich who were interested in art, creativity, the mind.
Oh, absolutely. This was a really fertile time for all those things. You had people like Alphonse Mater, for example.
Mater, yeah. He was a psychoanalyst, but also a scholar of art, wasn't he?
He was. He wrote a whole book on Ferdinand Hodler, a Swiss painter, and he even corresponded with Hodler. It's fascinating, right? This blend of psychoanalysis and art. And it's not just Mater. He himself had these really intense visions, almost like waking dreams around 1916. And when he told Jung about them, Jung just said, "What, you too?"
Oh, well, you too. That's amazing. It just shows that these kinds of experiences were, like, in the air.
Right. It wasn't just Jung. And then there's Hans Schmid, who also started documenting his own fantasies, even painting them, just like Jung was doing in Liber Novus. Like they were both trying to express those unconscious contents through art.
Yeah, like a parallel process. And wasn't there a woman, too, who was really into art? Moltzer, I think her name was?
Yes, Moltzer. She was a big proponent of integrating art and creativity into the whole psychoanalytic scene in Zurich. She really felt they needed more artists, more creative thinkers in the mix. She even saw Ricklin, another analyst, as a model for that.
And Ricklin's patient, J.B. Lang, also started painting, right? Symbolic paintings. It's like there's this tangible connection between psychoanalysis and artistic expression.
Right. And Moltzer herself kept a book she called her Bible, where she would combine pictures with her own writing. It's very similar to what Jung was doing.
Like a personal integration of images and words.
Exactly. And she actually recommended that practice to her patient Fanny Bowditch-Katz, too. So you can really see this whole context, this emphasis on art and creativity surrounding the Red Book.
And speaking of art, didn't Moltzer also play a role in, well, Jung's exploration of mandalas?
She did. We don't have the exact letters, but Jung mentions that M. Moltzer has again disturbed me with letters. So it sounds like they were having a lively dialogue about something.
Disturbed. That's a strong word, isn't it?
It is. And of course, Jung ends up including a lot of mandala drawings and paintings in Liber Novus. And he specifically mentions that this is when he first started to really grasp the idea of the self, you know, that core concept of Jungian psychology.
The self, yeah. So how did it come to him? How does he understand it in those early stages?
Well, he described it as this like complete and unified entity, the monad, he called it. And he saw the mandala as a visual representation of that monad, of the individual soul.
So the mandala is like a symbol of the self, of that inner wholeness.
Exactly. At first, he didn't fully understand where this whole process was going, but he started to see that the mandala itself was the goal, that point of integration. Remember that famous quote, "All the paths I took, all the steps I made, all led back to the one point that is to the center."
Yeah, that's beautiful. It really captures that idea of all those different paths, all those experiences converging on that single point of wholeness. And Jung's understanding of the mandala just kept growing from there.
Oh, absolutely. Throughout the 1920s, it became even more central to his work. It became this fundamental symbol of integration, wholeness, the whole process of individuation.
So let's talk about the actual writing of Liber Novus. It wasn't just one continuous process, was it? There were different phases, different manuscripts.
Right. The earliest one we have is called the draft. It contains fantasies, dialogues, visual material, all that, from October 1913 to February 1914. Then, a little later, in the winter of 1917, he starts working on a new manuscript. He calls it Scrutinies.
Scrutinies, interesting. And what's in that one?
Well, it picks up where the draft left off, essentially. He transcribes fantasies and experiences from April 1913 all the way to June 1916. So he's going back, revisiting earlier material, but also adding new stuff.
It's like he's layering those experiences, building on them over time.
Right. And just like with the draft, he's also adding his own commentaries, trying to understand what all of it means. And he even includes the 7 Sermons to the Dead in there, but this time with commentary on each sermon from Philemon.
Philemon, that wise old man figure.
Yeah.
He becomes a central part of the Red Book, doesn't he?
He does. And Scrutinies basically becomes the third book of Liber Novus. Liber Tertius, he called it. So the whole thing unfolds in these stages, these different phases of exploration and reflection.
And it's interesting to see how his own inner journey is reflected in his theoretical work. Like, in the years leading up to the Red Book, he was really focused on developing a structural understanding of the mind, right? How it works, what goes wrong, and all that.
Exactly. He was really productive in those early years. He came up with his theory of complexes, the idea of the collective unconscious with its archetypes, the concept of libido as psychic energy, all foundational stuff.
Right, the building blocks of his whole system.
Right. But then something shifts with the Red Book. It's like this catalyst for a new kind of inquiry, something more experiential, more focused on the process of development.
So it's not just about the structure of the mind anymore, but about how that structure unfolds over time.
Exactly, and that's where the concept of individuation comes in. That becomes a central focus for him in Liber Novus. He's trying to understand that process, that lifelong journey of integration and becoming whole.
So individuation, that core concept of Jungian psychology, is really born out of this book, out of his own personal experiences.
Absolutely, and he would go on to explore that concept for the rest of his life in his writing, his clinical work, everything. Liber Novus is the starting point, the ground zero.
And this focus on individuation, we can see it even more clearly if we look at these two talks he gave in 1916 called Adaptation.
Oh, yeah. Those are fascinating. What's really interesting about them is this distinction he makes between two kinds of adaptation.
Hmm.
Adapting to the outer world, to society and all that, and adapting to the inner world, to the unconscious.
Makes sense. We have to adapt to both, right? To the world around us and to the world within us.
Right. And Jung's argument is that true psychological development involves both. You can't just focus on one or the other. But he also says that adapting to the inner world, to the unconscious, is what leads to individuation.
Ah, so that's the connection. Individuation is about confronting those inner forces, those unconscious contents.
Exactly. But he also points out that this can be tough because sometimes adapting to the inner world means going against what society expects of you. It can lead to a sense of guilt.
Guilt. Like, why would you feel guilty for following your own inner path?
Well, he calls it tragic guilt. It's like this feeling that you're breaking away from the collective, from the norms and expectations of society.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a need to, make amends.
Make amends.
Yeah. He says that the individuating person often feels compelled to create something new. New values, new insights, something to give back to society to make up for this, breaking away.
Interesting. So it's not just about individual development. It's about finding a way to integrate that individual development back into the collective to contribute something new and valuable.
Right. But he's also pretty clear that this whole individuation thing isn't for everyone. He actually says individuation was for the few.
For the few. What does that even mean? Like, not everyone's cut out for it.
Well, he thought that people who didn't have a certain level of creative capacity or inner strength might be better off sticking with the collective, conforming to those established values. But for those who did have that capacity, for the few, individuation was this vital process.
Okay, so it's not just about wanting to individuate. It's about being able to handle it, the responsibility that comes with it.
Exactly. And speaking of responsibility, one of the big surprising themes that comes up in the Red Book is this whole idea of a new religion.
New religion. Wow. Where did that come from?
Well, there are these really powerful dialogues between Jung and his soul, and in one of them, the soul is telling him to reach a higher level of consciousness, something beyond just intellect. And Jung is, of course, kind of overwhelmed by this. He asks what he's supposed to do.
And what does the soul say?
It says, the new religion and its proclamation.
Just like that. Straight up, new religion.
Pretty much. And Jung, understandably, has some doubts. He's like, well, I can't do that.
Pretty tall order, I guess. Proclaiming a whole new religion.
Oh, completely. But the soul is very insistent. It tells him not to underestimate his understanding, that he gets this in a way others don't. And it really stresses the importance of this calling that Jung has.
His calling.
Right. This is why he's having these revelations. And he shouldn't keep them to himself. He needs to share them with the world, even if he doesn't know exactly how.
But Jung was pretty nervous about that, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Putting all this intensely personal, potentially controversial stuff out there.
Well, yeah, he was filled with anxiety about it. He thought people wouldn't understand, that he'd be ridiculed, condemned. He called it a misfortune if he were to publish it.
But the soul didn't care about any of that, right? It's like, this needs to be said regardless of what people think.
Exactly. The soul is all about the truth, no matter the consequences. And this whole tension between personal truth and, public perception, it comes up again and again in Jung's life. Later on, he even talks about the difference between Wahrheit and Dichtung, truth, and poetry.
Oh, right. Like, how do you express those deep truths without, freaking everyone out?
Right. In a letter from 1918, he talks about how difficult it was to articulate his experiences from the Red Book. He felt it was profound, a real Wahrheit, a truth. But he knew most people wouldn't get it. So he thought about using Dichtung, poetry, to kind of shield himself.
Make it more palatable, more acceptable to the mainstream.
Exactly. He knew that people, the Philistines he called them, would be more comfortable if they thought he was just a poet, making stuff up, rather than someone who had had these genuine and potentially disturbing experiences.
It's like he was trying to find a way to communicate these radical ideas without being totally ostracized.
Exactly. And he even says that he'd become aware of more steps of creation, more of the underlying processes of the mind than anyone before him.
Wow. Witnessing the whole creative process, the matrix, everything all at once, that must have been overwhelming.
Oh, completely. He felt that in normal consciousness, the mind filters everything. It gives you this neat and tidy end product, a thought or a perception. But in the unconscious, he was dealing with the whole raw, messy process. And that made it incredibly difficult to understand, to integrate, and especially to communicate.
Yeah. How do you even begin to put that into words?
Exactly. And then for some reason, he just stops working on Liber Novus. He leaves the last illustration unfinished and stops the regular transcription.
Stops. Why?
Well, he later said that he'd reached this central point in his journey, the Tao, he called it, a point of balance. And that marked a shift for him from this intense inner exploration to a more outward engagement with the world.
So it's like he reached a point of equilibrium within himself, and now it was time to, like, bring that out into the world.
Right, and he starts giving more lectures, presenting his ideas to a wider audience, and he saw those activities as a way of compensating for all those years of, being so focused on his inner world. It was time for a balance.
Like a necessary re-engagement with the external world after this profound period of introspection.
Fascinating. And speaking of the external world, how did Jung make sure that his own experiences, all those crazy visions in the Red Book, didn't influence his patients?
That was a big concern for him. He was very aware of how suggestion could work, even unconsciously in therapy. So he actually stayed silent for a long time about his methods, about his exploration of mandalas, all of that. At least 13 years.
Wow, 13 years. That's a long time to keep quiet about something so important to you.
It was. But he wanted to be absolutely sure that when his patients started drawing mandalas, which they did spontaneously, it wasn't because he'd put the idea in their heads.
Right, it had to come from them organically.
Exactly. And through his research, through all his reading and studying, he became convinced that mandalas were universal. They show up across all times and cultures, in different religions, spiritual traditions, you name it.
So it wasn't just him, it was something deeper, something archetypal. Exactly. And what's really interesting is that he noticed that patients of other therapists, people who hadn't even heard of Jung, were also drawing mandalas.
That's a pretty strong argument for their universality, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it probably played a role in his decision not to publish Liber Novus right away. He needed to be sure that this wasn't just his own personal thing, but something that reflected a deeper collective reality.
He had to validate it, essentially.
Right. And he also had his own experience with active imagination to draw on. He'd been using that method for years and had seen all sorts of images and symbols emerge. And what's amazing is that later on, he would find confirmation of those symbols in texts he'd never even seen before.
Wow, so it's like the unconscious was giving him these symbols, and then years later, he'd find them in some ancient text.
Exactly. It really strengthened his belief that these symbols were real, that they pointed to something beyond his own individual experience.
Yeah, and this whole idea of the power of symbols, of the word, as he calls it, it comes up a lot in the Red Book. It's not just about language, is it? It's something more.
It's definitely more. He explores all these different facets of the word. Like his soul warns him about hellish webs of words, how they can trap you and lead you astray.
So words can be dangerous.
They can be. But then on the other hand, the soul also says that the word is an image of God. So it's also sacred, a way of connecting to the divine.
So it's both dangerous and sacred.
Exactly. It's paradoxical. There's also this image of the word as a saving symbol that comes out of the darkness. It represents healing, transformation, redemption. And then you have that whole episode with the dead woman struggling for the word, which then turns into the phallus. H-A-P, he calls it.
H-A-P.
Yeah. So it's like the word is also tied to this primal life force, to creation itself.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. And Jung himself seems to struggle with language, doesn't he? Like, it's not enough to express what he's experiencing.
Right. He talks about his own attempts at expressing himself as just stammering, like he feels inadequate to the task. But then there's this beautiful moment where he remembers Philemon giving him a foreign language, a new way of speaking, a new sensitivity.
So it's like these experiences are opening up new possibilities for expression, for understanding.
Exactly. The word becomes this powerful symbol, a bridge to deeper realities, a crucial part of his whole transformation. And speaking of the scrutinies, that third part of Liber Novus, well, there's this interesting letter from Carrie Baines that sheds some light on how it fits into the whole thing.
Carrie Baines, yeah. She was Jung's close collaborator, a translator, I think.
Right. And in 1958, she writes to Jung asking about some notes she'd taken from the Red Book. She'd copied material up to the beginning of the Prüfungen, which is the German word for scrutinies.
Prüfungen, interesting.
And she mentions that this goes beyond what Frau Jaffa put at KW's disposal. KW being Kurt Wolff, Jung's publisher. So it seems like scrutinies was considered even more important, more central than some of the other sections that had been shared.
Like the real heart of the matter.
And Jung's response is very brief. He says, lend it, no problem at all. So it's clear that he considered scrutinies an integral part of Liber Novus. Even people who'd seen earlier drafts knew that it was essential.
Okay, so it's all connected. It's all part of one big work. And one of the big tensions that runs through the whole thing is this contrast between what Jung calls the spirit of this time and the spirit of the depths.
Right. That's a key distinction. The spirit of this time is like the dominant mindset of the modern world, all about reason, science, material stuff, external focus, you know.
Yeah, the kind of mindset that says you're the center of the universe. Your ego is everything.
Right. It whispers that the ultimate meaning is all about you, the individual, and that you have to, like, force these opposing forces within yourself together to achieve mastery.
But then there's the spirit of the depths. What's that all about?
That's a whole different perspective. It says, you are an image of the unending world. All the last mysteries of becoming and passing away live in you.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's not about the individual ego anymore, but about being connected to this whole vast, mysterious process of existence.
Exactly. He says that we contain all those complexities within us, the creation and destruction, the joy and sorrow, the light and darkness. And that's why we can even recognize those things in the world around us.
We're like a microcosm of the universe, reflecting the whole thing.
Exactly. And Jung says that this word, this understanding, came to him from the spirit of the depths, not because he wanted it, but because it had to come out, like it was a necessity.
He was just the messenger, in a way.
Right. A serf, he even calls himself. Entrusted with this message he doesn't fully understand, and he says it would be unbearable to hold on to if he didn't share it.
So that's the tension, right, between this narrow, ego-focused view of the world and this bigger, more interconnected perspective. And that plays out throughout the whole book.
Absolutely. And then, you know, desire. Interesting how he connects desire to the soul.
Desire. How does that fit in?
Well, he says that when desire, which usually focuses on external things, starts to turn inwards, it can lead you to the place of the soul.
Okay, so instead of wanting things from the world, you start to desire something deeper, something within yourself.
Exactly. But he also warns that if you don't actually find your soul in that inward turning, you can end up in this terrible emptiness, and then you just keep chasing those external desires even harder, trying to fill the void.
It's like a warning against always looking outside.